So house is a system. You really want to think about developing your house with everything in mind before you even kind of start building it, right? Your building envelope. Your building envelope consists of two things. It actually separates your conditioned space from your unconditioned space. And what's required to do that is air barrier and insulation. You have to have these things in contact and continuous. So, we'll get into some examples where we don't always see them in contact, nor are they continuous, and how that affects things. But building envelope is really what we define as our beer cooler for the house.
Oh, I just woke up. Did you say beer cooler?
Beer cooler.
Oh, I like that. I like beer.
All right, we can all kind of think about that, right? That styrofoam beer cooler. That's what seriously your building envelope is around your house.
I'm salivating at the moment.
I know.
So, all right.
I just got to say it sporadically.
There's a cooler back there. I wonder what's in it. Oh, almost as good as beer. Chick-fil-A biscuits. Okay.
And where you define your beer cooler or your building thermal envelope, for every house it's probably different. There are no wrong building envelopes unless you don't have that air barrier and insulation in full contact and continuous. When you're designing your house, you also want to make sure you've properly sized and installed your heating and cooling system. That doesn't just mean that you have the right furnace or the right heat pump or the right air conditioner or the right air handler, but it also means I have the right ducts, I have the right duct size to actually distribute all this air that we've cooled or heated, and they're actually getting to the comfort of the occupants. Really use ACA, Manual J, Manual S, Manual D. If you want to know more about that, we have an HVAC course for Earthcraft that once you're completed it, you're an Earthcraft HVAC contractor, I think is the title.
That's an exciting name. That's a good
I know. I got to make sure I'm saying it right, but I believe that is the actual title, that your certificate that you get after completing it.
It's very exciting.
Also, we want to make sure that after we've sealed this house, we've made it really tight, that we just want to be good builders. It's not actually required by the energy code, but we want to make sure that we think about ventilation. The average house has a hole, if you summed up all of the penetrations, all the missed seams and stuff like that, approximately this big. All right, so that's a kind of relatively large hole in a house. If you were to sum all that up and stick it on a window, right? So what we're asking is that we reduce that size of the, actual hole in the house, through infiltration, through air leakage, that we actually cut a small hole about this big and ventilate. I would trade a hole this big for one this big that I actually know where the air is coming from, right? Because when you cut a hole in the house and you ventilate from it, you know where the air is coming from. It's probably not coming from the crawl space or the attic like our traditional hole, right? Because we don't know where those holes are. Those are just mists. So really keeping in mind ventilation, that we're bringing in fresh air for our occupants. Kind of want to just ask this question here because it came up in the last training I came to. Do houses need to breathe?
It's a trick question.
It's a trick question.
Don't fall for it. It's a trick question.
Do houses need to breathe? Nope. Do y'all need to breathe? Yeah. That's kind of important, right? Houses might need to dry, but that's not really breathe. We need to breathe. We need to have the good air. We need to have that, actual ventilation come through. But that's why in the energy code we don't actually see ventilation yet. But maybe. Yeah,
it's kind of interesting because I know a couple folks here work in the commercial world. In the commercial world, you have to do a good job on the building envelope. You have to do a good job on the mechanical systems, and you have to bring in outside air. All three of those are the law, in essence. They're all code requirements. But on homes, it's kind of funny because you have to do this and you have to do this, but when it gets to the third bullet down there, only 5 out of the 50 states actually require intentional ventilation, and Georgia is not one of them. So it's something to kind of think about, that as we start building tighter homes for energy efficiency, we might want to start thinking also about bringing in outside air, not because the house needs to breathe, but because the people in the house need to breathe. Does that kind of make sense? And we'll show you, if we have time, we'll try to show you very quickly a couple ways that we do this. We do this, by the way, on just about every Earthcraft house.
Every green building
green building program, every Beyond Code program is all about sealing up the house, and because that saves tremendous amounts of energy.
Yes.
And then bringing in intentional outside air from a known source And that's for health reasons, okay? So it's kind of winning the game. You get the best of all worlds if you do both of these things. But by law, you are not required to do intentional ventilation other than maybe a bath fan and kitchen range hoods kind of things.
And if you have a great building envelope and you have the appropriately sized and distributing air system, if Mike hits the clicker one more time, you're going to prevent moisture from coming into your house. And usually we see moisture coming into the house not actually in bulk water, but what we see as humidity, right? We live in a hot, humid climate. So if you seal all the gaps and you properly cool your home, you're going to have a reduction in the moisture that comes into your house. And there are two things that can kill a house: moisture and/or humidity, and critters, termites.
Okay. I think they're going to say rain or moisture were the two. But
well, there you go.
Fireplaces?
They haven't redesigned them to seal better?
Kinda. Actually, it's funny you should ask that.
Funny you should ask.
Sort of, kinda. So let us tease you a little bit on that and just say the part about fireplaces coming up. But we'll try to tell you it's a little bit murky the way it's been spelled out, but we'll try to help clarify that. And I know you'll be interested because you sell fireplaces, right? So, so let's kind of say. Let's say this, from a building science standpoint, we want to understand that really the physics of what happens in a building, it's pretty straightforward. It's understanding the flow of three things, and that's heat, air, and moisture. So if we understand how they flow, we can understand how to control them in essence. And we'll also probably touch on, like I said, ventilation quickly and wrap up with a little bit on those two. So the first thing is that all of these tend to go from more to less, okay? So for example, heat goes from what to what?
I heard it. Say it loud and proud.
Say it like you mean it. Heat goes from hot to cold, right? Hot to cold, okay. And heat does not rise, okay? That's a myth. Hot air rises, correct? But if it's hot right up here and it's cold right down here, which way is the heat going to go? It's going to go down. So heat always goes from hot to cold, and it always has to travel in at least one of these three ways, right? Conduction, which is heat flow through a solid, you're touching something or a wall of a building or a solid material, or by convection, which is through air movement or a fluid, in this case air being the fluid. If it's cold out, cold air leaks in, that cools down my building. If it's hot outside, hot air leaks in, heats up my building. That's convective heat transfer. And then the last one is radiation. Radiation is about surfaces, okay? It's a hot surface, it's a cold surface. Everybody, your body is either absorbing heat by radiation or emitting heat by radiation. Every body, meaning every entity, everything in this room is doing the exact same thing.
This table, this
okay?
floor.
So those are the things that cause heat to move around. And of course, heat is a form of energy that we care a lot about in terms of paying for it. So the first one, let's take conduction. Conduction is most prevalent in the surfaces of the envelope, and throughout the skin, if you will, of the beer cooler. The conduction is predominantly slowed down, or if not stopped, it doesn't really get stopped, but it gets slowed down by insulation, right? So you should change your name. What's your name? I'm sorry, insulation guy. That's what I'm going to call him. John, what's your company again? Builder Specialties. So you should change your name to insulation. We sell conduction slower downers or something like that. Maybe not.
Heat slower downers.
Heat slower downers. So here is it's a little bit hard to see, but here's a regular photograph, and here's an infrared photograph. And what is missing over here in this wall?
Insulation. I'm hearing it.
Now, how did that happen? That's what we always like to. We don't know, honestly, but who wants to speculate? How do you think this got built with no insulation in those cavities? What do you think happened? It could have been that it was a window. That's a possibility. Someone says this could be a garage. It's not a garage. I know that.
Someone said
I think is a good possibility.
They ran out of money.
They ran out of money. No, that was not one of your jobs, John. It's possible. A good theory is that the tub was set against that exterior wall during framing. The tub gets set before the insulation, right? And once the tub surround is up against that wall and there's sheathing on the outside of the wall, it's kind of hard to get insulation in there. So that's a possibility. We don't really know what happened, but we can definitely see the effect of missing insulation. The effective R value of an empty stud wall is almost as, it's basically the same as this transom window up here. So that's pretty bad. Maybe an R2 or something like that.
Maybe.
So, okay? So insulation is what we're going to use to slow down conduction. Convection is heat flow by a fluid, and the fluid in this case, again, is air. Roxanne, what are we looking at?
All right, so this is actually the baseboard of a house. We've pulled the actual baseboard off. It's right there at the bottom plate. The homeowner was complaining of some comfort issues. And what's going on, as we can see in the infrared picture on the right, when we turned on the camera and kind of let some air pass through the house, cold air is coming up through the bottom of the house and going into the house from the bottom plate. So what does that indicate to us there? What didn't happen on the bottom plate there? It didn't get sealed. And, there are some ways that you can seal it. Mike's got some there. Caulking works on it good. You need to stop that, because what that does is actually create cold air comes into the house and it starts to circulate, and that really causes some comfort issue due to convection, that heat transfer through convection.
So basically the simple way to slow down or stop convective heat transfer is to do what to the building envelope?
Seal it.
Seal it up. And if we're going to seal it up, we need to use materials that are intended to be air barriers, right? Or air sealing materials, right? And so, John, the product that you sell is a great insulation product, but fiberglass is not, and nor was it ever intended to be, an air sealing material, right?
So this picture is actually a bat that was facing, the top of the ceiling.
It was flipped over on top of that.
And now it's been pulled back. So you can see how dirty it is. So what we know here is that we must have an air leak here, because what it's doing is actually filtering the air coming into the house, right? And it's catching all those, particulates. And man, insulation makes a pretty good filter. Not a great one, but a pretty good one. It's not an air barrier, though.
Yeah. So insulation is a great product, but it doesn't stop airflow. You're getting that natural rising warm air effect and warm air rising effect in the winter, and a lot of energy flowing out. Here's another example too of where the insulation was run, but there was no air barrier
on a knee wall.
On an attic knee wall, and in this case, this is the access door to the knee wall. This homeowner was very uncomfortable, but they survived the summer. My guess is they had a grossly oversized air conditioner, and they survived the summer. But when winter came along, it just got too darn cold.
Because that's their metal tub right there.
Yeah. See the tub? What do you think the R value of a tub is? What do you think? Can't be good. Can't be good, right? So the pathway for this is a common sort of flaw or hole in your envelope is where air can leak right through the insulation, or in this case, there was no blocking under the knee wall. And those are both, explicitly, the energy code says you can't do that. So big comfort problems as well. All right, moving on to radiation. Radiation is heat flow from a hot surface to a cold surface. There's two parts of the building envelope where radiation really dominates. Radiation is sort of the tail wagging the dog in this case. Where are the two hot places that the radiation really dominates? What do you think? Windows and the roof. Very good. So let's do windows first. We are facing east, correct? I think, isn't that east?
I have to assume.
If it's the morning and the sun's coming in, what should we guess?
Ah.
Okay, so, I don't know.
See, I already got it, Mike. I'm sitting getting nice and toasty.
Yeah. So the sun, as I'm sure you're aware, has a tremendous amount of energy transfer, right? And the sun hits the side of a wall or a window of a building. It hits it with about 250 BTUs an hour. You heard that term before, BTU? What does that mean? Okay, what the heck does that mean? Hold up your water bottle for a second. Hold up how much is in that water bottle? He can't read it either. This is hilarious.
One pint.
1 pint. Perfect. So raise that up. A pint weighs how much? A pint of water weighs how much?
Oh.
Don't overthink it. 1 pound. Have you ever heard the saying, a pint's a pound the world around? If you like beer like me, I love pints. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing again. So the temperature, what's the definition of a BTU? the amount of heat to raise the temperature of that bottle of water, how much? 1 degree Fahrenheit. Thank you very much. Perfect prop right on the spot. That was excellent. So a BTU is not a lot of energy. It's some people say it's about the heat that you get when you light a kitchen match and you light it and you burn it all the way down. That's 1 BTU. So the sun, if you had, I don't know how big that is. I'm guessing maybe right here. That door and that side glass over there, that's probably at least 40 square feet, right? Would you agree with that? A door is about 20 square feet, so I'm going to say that's about 40 square feet. The sun is hitting that, believe it or not, with 10,000 BTUs per hour of energy. That is a lot. And here's the kicker. If that is, let's say, that whole thing is a single pane window. When the sun hits a single pane window, some of the sun's energy is absorbed and reflected back, but most of the sun's energy is transmitted all the way through into the building. And in this case, the answer is 80%. 80% of the sun's energy passes through a single pane window. And so that's how many BTUs getting in? Out of 10,000 hitting the window, 8,000 are coming in, right? Okay, Ed, you're in HVAC world. What does it mean if I tell you 8,000 BTUs an hour? That's over half a ton of air conditioning just from that one little window right there. So if that window is single pane, 80% gets through. If that window is double pane, 60% gets through. If that window is double pane with a low E coating, only about 30% goes through. So that's a pretty significant reduction from 8,000 BTUs an hour down to, in this case, let's say around 3,000 BTUs an hour. That's a big reduction. So to slow down, we're going to say this again, to slow down radiation, you either block it with something completely. Like we could block that window off with Norboard, for example. That would be an excellent solar. But we'd sort of lose the effect of the window, right? But we could, in other words, blocking radiation is pretty easy. I just block the radiation going onto your head, right? But to get the light coming through, okay, yeah, that's a little trickier. We could also do it with a tinted window. Tinted windows will block the solar gain as well, but what's the difference between a tinted window and a low E window? Which one lets in more light?
Low E.
Right? The tinted windows block light as well. Low E windows basically get the performance of a tint with allowing a whole lot of light through as well. So that's kind of where we want to go with windows. That's all an example of radiant heat transfer. Where's the other place that radiation really dominates? Yeah, look up on the roof. Okay, Roxanne, tell me what's going up here on up here.
You're not going to talk about these guys?
We are right now, but let's just take this example.
Right. So let's open up our workbook to this page if we haven't already. Let's do a little activity. All right, so we've learned about the 3 types of heat transfer. Number 1, conductive. Number 2, convection. Number 3 is going to be radiation. So we see the sun, big ball, flaming ball in the sky. Number 1 to number 2. Let's pause real quick. Number 2, those are shingles, right? What color are shingles? Typically black. What kind of texture do they have? They're rough. Do you know what we call these? Solar absorbers.
We call shingles solar collectors.
Solar collectors. If we wanted a material to really collect all the sun's heat and really get hot, man, we created the perfect thing because basically we took this black granular surface and then kind of leaned it back to say, come on, give me that sun.
Heat me up.
So from 1 to 2, as Mike has already written in somehow, what kind of heat transfer is it? It's rad.
It's totally rad.
From 2 to 3, so from the shingles to the underside of the decking, what is that? Those are in contact, right? Conduction, because they're in contact, remember?
And they're solid materials, right? You're conducting through the 1/2 inch of OSB, right? Or the plywood. You're conducting through. That's a solid material. Does that make sense? Okay, so that second answer is conduction.
All right.
Now think on this one.
From 3 to 4, I'm going to just give you some visualizations. From the decking to, let's call it your ducts.
Or your framing.
Or your Yeah, or your insulation 3. I'm going to tell you that underside of decking is about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's just kind of think of that as a big flaming sun, right? Not as big, it's kind of smaller. It's only 160 degrees. And it's shining down onto your ductwork or your insulation. So what is from 3 to 4? Radiation. Remember, it's you got that big heat source glaring down at something. There's no air movement, it's just glaring down at it. So, you know, when you go outside, if you were to stick an umbrella on top of you, feel cooler, you'd have the same kind of principle going in your attic here.
The surface, believe it or not, of that decking is so hot, you can't put your hand on it.
You actually literally can't stick your hand on here because it's about 160 degrees. Your human hand can actually withstand about 150 degrees.
Yeah, it's too hot for you to leave your hand on
so you
voluntarily.
can't just be like going
now,
like this. You can go like
shove
that.
your hand on there and you puncture a nail, you might actually have a harder time pulling your... Okay, try it at home sometime.
No. So the reason...
use your tongue. Try it. I don't know. Whatever.
All right, from 3 to 4, again, it's radiating, which is why they create materials like this where you have the decking that you would have used just normal, right? You would have just put this up there just like that, no problem. They actually create a silver film or, you know, aluminum film that goes over it that actually prevents that radiation from coming down, or it slows it down. So homeowners always like shiny things, right? Shiny, new, pretty, yeah. You always want to make sure that you install it facing down, because the only way you can actually, there are 2 ways you can mess this up. Number 1, install it like this. That won't work. You have to, you know, install it like this. The other thing is you actually touch it. It actually conducts very well, because metal conducts, right? It's a very thin sheet.
So it has to basically not be touching, for example, insulation. You never want to put insulation up against it. You have to have a gap.
Right, so you don't want to like put this up there and spray foam it. We've seen it. You don't want to do it. Totally negates this. You also don't want to take your ductwork and touch it right here, because you're now conducting 160 degrees pretty easily right there.
Question? Do you have a question?
You don't recommend doing spray foam over a product like that?
Not over that. No, it's kind of be one or the other.
You can't spray foam on top of this.
Can you do like baffles and then spray?
Yes, you could. But it's probably...
What did you say?
She said, can you do baffles and then spray?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
But...
I heard waffles. I was like, what? Why? Are you cooking your waffles on here?
Well, Roxanne needs breakfast quick. Stat. Let's get her some food. Stat.
So this is a good product, especially if you have your air handler up there and you can't, you know, if you can't afford to spray foam the roof line or insulate the roof line, this is fairly cheap. Like, it's almost the same price.
They do make retrofit products. Some have this bubble wrap on them, which is
I'll pass it around.
kind of meaningless. But they also make some that are like basically aluminum foil, and they've got little holes in them, so they're not going to trap moisture. But you can staple it up to the bottom of the rafter, or you can staple it up to the actual decking itself. And it's you know, they call it a radiant barrier. That's kind of a bad name.
Yeah.
Really, a better name to call it to me is a low emitting surface, because what it is, it's a surface that does get very, very hot. It just doesn't emit. Even though it's hot, it doesn't give off its heat by radiation very easily. And as a result, it slows down the throughput of heat into the attic, and it keeps the attic cooler. Has anybody been in an attic that had this stuff installed before? What, did it work? It's noticeably cooler in that space.
I can't say it's pleasant,
well,
but it is
it's a lot nicer.
Much cooler.
What do you figure? About 20, maybe 25 degrees? Sometimes they claim 30 degrees cooler. But the air in the attic will stay cooler because the overall gain of heat into the attic has been reduced, because this is a low emitting surface. Does that kind of make sense? I like to use the analogy when I was a kid growing up in Rome, Georgia, and we had the crappiest elementary school. It was the worst. It was like the low point of construction. And it was built in the 70s, and it was a metal playground slide with an asphalt parking lot, and you know, that was my school. Yay! Education in Georgia, yay! And but anyway, it was. But I just remember, you know, I kind of remember this. I didn't figure this heat transfer out until much later. But if you were to walk on a hot day like today, or a really hot day, you walk out there onto the asphalt parking lot, you look at the side of it, you can see the heat being absorbed and then obviously emitted. Black is a good absorber and a good emitter. As you walk onto the parking lot, you feel your face is feeling it, right? You can tell it's really hot on your face. The surfaces around your face are hot. Well, the metal playground slide is being radiated by the sun just as much. And if you put your hand right up to the slide, but you don't actually touch it, it doesn't feel hot. Now, what happens if you touch the slide? Yeah, I learned that when I was a kid, just in case you're wondering, right? So you only learn that once, and then you throw water on the slide. But the surface is a hot surface, but it doesn't emit heat by radiation. And that's the same thing that's going on up in your attic. So we're not trying to sell radiant barriers. It is an option. Okay. Do you make a decking that has it installed on it? Yes. Oh, look, a sample of his own product. Wait, here, throw it. Or pass it around.
No, please don't throw it.
I've got like a gajillion of these.
Please don't throw it. I'm already injured enough.
Thank you. So what is your product called? Solar board.
This
here. Anyone that can eat the whole sample gets a free installation of solar board. So I think it's a great product. It's a great concept because it doesn't use any energy and it keeps the attic cooler. And like Roxanne said, the only way to screw it up is to install it upside down. So
well, or touch it with something like your duck.
So
all right, but let's continue on this example. All right, so we've had radiation from the sun to the shingles, conduction from the shingles to the decking, radiation again from the decking to the, whatever you have in your attic. All right, the last one goes from 5 to 4 to 6, or excuse me, 5 to 6 to 7. That's convection, right? That's your ventilation through that. That's where you have a vented roof line. That's where we get, the convection going on. We got that air movement. There's some pluses and minuses in it, but that's how the heat transfer happens there.
All right, so an attic is an amazing little example of heat transfer. It has radiation absorbed at the shingles. It conducts through. Then the decking emits by radiation again. Then the surfaces here absorb that heat, and then the air heats up. And then we use convective cooling. We just use the fact that warm air rises. So, this attic air might be 130 degrees. It vents out, and it pulls in air that's only 90 degrees. That's great. Fantastic. The problem with venting an attic is, think about it. We're really just treating a symptom, not the cause. Does that work for you? Does that make sense? We're only treating the fact that the air got hot, not why did it get hot in the attic in the first place. So really, the best thing we could do would probably be something shiny up here or less absorptive up on the roof. Any ideas? What's another roofing material? Yeah, a metal roof would be a lot less absorptive. Certainly not without cost implications. I'm not trying to imply that, but it would do a lot better from a heat absorption standpoint. Or we could put a low-emitting surface here, such as the solar board product, that would not emit heat by radiation. And then just appreciate that venting an attic is, it's treating the symptom. I'm not saying it isn't a good thing to do in this situation, but, venting attics, I think we get all excited about thinking it's the greatest thing in the world. In reality, it's just treating the symptom. And also, when you vent with air and you live in Georgia, what are you letting in? Besides heat, what are you letting in? You're letting in a lot of humidity, generally moisture, heat and hot, that's right. So the one thing that we don't want you to do is, I'll try to draw it up here, it won't be pretty, but we don't want you to put a thing with a propeller, a bow tie up here. That would be, what am I trying to draw right here?
Power ventilator.
An attic fan. And this power attic vent fan, when it operates, it's like a giant exhaust fan, right? So which way is it pulling air? It's pulling air, and it's pulling air from here, and it's exhausting it out the top, right? Right? That's the theory. So it's putting the attic itself under what kind of pressure? Positive or negative? You buy that, right? Negative pressure?
Here we go. We got our nice little example.
Open your door, maybe, of your.
Oh, sorry. We've got to do a little bit of that.
So let me turn it off for a second. So I don't know if y'all could see this. Can we raise it up a little bit? Here's a little house of pressure, is what we call this. And we got your conditioned space up here, and up in the roof, up in the attic, we've got attic vent fan. We got a gable-mounted power attic vent fan, another gable vent on this side. The theory is we're going to spend money and run this fan, and it's going to cool off my attic, and that's going to save me money. But the problem is this fan doesn't discriminate where does it get air from. So some of the air is going to come from, we didn't bring the smoke stick, did we? I didn't think
Yes, it's
about
in the car.
Uh-oh. Oh, well. Maybe later. Maybe at the break or something. If we turn on, is this the one? We turn on this fan, it is putting the attic under a negative pressure, but what else is happening to the house right here? Can you see the little doors?
Can you see the doors? They were like this before it started.
See,
When we
they're
turned on,
hanging-
it went like that.
Here they're hanging down when I turn off the fan. They're pretty much hanging down. But when I turn on this fan, what does that indicate is happening?
How's the pressure inside the house looking? Positive or negative? Negative. All right, so let's just recap. It was neutral here. When we turned on the fan, it's negative. So that must mean the fan's sucking air from
Somewhere.
the conditioned space. Oh, way. Oh, wow. You mean we're cooling our attic with our nicely conditioned air from our living space?
Sadly.
And then blowing
yes.
it right out. So that means, yeah, we totally are cooling our attic. But
to
how
be
are we
negative.
cooling it? Well, partly through some ventilation from this side, but also the conditioned air that we had inside our living space is also cooling off our attic. And not if we're running this at peak time and making more energy.
We're helping
come
attic
in.
warming, aren't we? Yeah. So in the end, a power attic vent fan really will cool your attic. We're not denying that. But is it going to save you energy? No, it doesn't. So as a result, George has actually said, we don't want you to do this. We don't want you to use a fan to vent an attic. The only time somebody was whined a lot and said, okay, but what if I want a solar powered fan? It's like,
Fine.
okay, fine, but still don't do it. Don't do it. Don't use a vent fan on an attic. It just sucks conditioned air into the attic. Okay? The only other question we sometimes get is, what if I changed my building thermal envelope and I foamed the roof line? And we've actually had a lot of houses that have done that. Has anybody been in a house or done this on a project before? Did it work? It actually works extremely well. And the reason it works so well is a couple of things. One is because it's very, very airtight, because the foam itself is both an air barrier and an insulation. It's also very expensive, so I'm not saying there isn't a cost associated with it. But the big energy gain from it is that what is this no longer located in?
It's not in a blast furnace.
Right? The attic there is no attic anymore, right? The duct and the air handler are no longer in this nasty blast furnace unconditioned space. They're now, I can see, they're now completely inside the insulation. And here's another bonus. Maybe this is what you're going to ask.
So then that changes my load calculation on the manual day,
It does change your load calculation.
because in that space it becomes part of the envelope.
That is correct. But it actually is not, it actually, believe it or not, can help your load calculation. You might think, because, okay, it has nothing to do with volume. It has everything to do with surfaces, though. But it does increase the surfaces. But there's a gain that you have to account for. The gain is that the ductwork and air handler are inside.
You don't have a duct load anymore.
So from an energy standpoint, it's been proven over and over again. If you get the ducts and air handler inside of your beer cooler, it will work better. And that's the gain. By the way, there's another bonus from the code. Can I throw one more thing? Just a second.
Hey, we had some DET people take the course.
Oh, yeah, okay.
What's the bonus for
What is
having...
the bonus if the ducts and air handler are inside the insulation?
Do you have
What do
to-
we not have to do? You don't have to do vents, but no, but what do you not have to do? You don't have to test the duct system. You do not have to test the ducts. If the ducts and air handler are 100% inside the building thermal envelope, you do not have to test the duct system.
All right, but do you still have to test the house?
Still have to be done.
Still have to test the house.
Yes, you got to seal ducts with mastic.
All right,
You got to get the
question?
air to where it's supposed to go.
I've been told that you don't have to wrap the ductwork in that configuration. I have a hard time not wrapping.
Robert,
All right.
that is a really good question. Okay, so can I repeat it? Because I want everybody to hear what Robert just asked. I want everybody to hear what Robert just asked. All right, kick him there for a second. Okay, Robert just asked a very important question. If I have foamed the roof line and the ducts are located inside the building envelope, do I have to insulate them via the energy code? And Roxanne, what's the answer?
Because they're in conditioned space, you are not required to insulate them.
It's kind of crazy.
However, I'm going to say in the same breath, right? Although it's not required, it is highly suggested. Why might that be? Condensation. That's a big one, right? Remember how I said moisture or critters can like totally destroy your house? So yeah, let's just, whew, Jesus, Mike.
You're welcome. I just scared you.
Ductopotamus is out here.
I know. I'm not saying that's a pretty duct system, but all those ducts are inside the building thermal envelope.
But they have R6 on them, I think, or probably. But yeah, we still suggest doing at least R6 around ducts just so you don't have a condensation problem.
Yeah. But interestingly enough, to go to your direct question, the answer is no, you do not have to insulate them if the ducts and air handler are inside. It seems I would always recommend insulating supply ducts, even a small amount, just for condensation. Does anybody else have any other comments? I want to make sure we covered everything. Yeah.
If you do this application, you eliminate your events.
Correct.
Yep.
Will the building code allow you to do that?
Yes. The answer is, so the question is, are you allowed to do this? And because you'd have to, if it's a straight gable roof, you also have to insulate the gable walls and everything, right? I mean, it's not an attic anymore. But the answer is yes, you can do this. And in essence, you're encapsulating the attic. You do not have to do it that way, but if you choose to do that, it's going to cost more than doing a good job of air sealing and insulating the flat ceiling. But it does have some advantages from a performance standpoint, mainly that the ducts and air handler are not in an oven. That's really the big advantage. Yeah.
Has there been any studies done on what the payback period for the energy savings versus what the initial cost?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Builders ask that all the time.
Interestingly enough, what Ed was getting at, you actually might see a downsizing of the equipment.
That's probably the best thing is that if you bring your ducts inside conditioned space, it's not directly the payback for the insulation, how well the house is going to perform, but when you actually bring the ducts inside conditioned space by using this application, you might be able to go a whole half ton or a ton less on your actual heating and cooling equipment. I mean, that's the best thing for me. Also, you might be able to sell it now because now they won't have to do a duct blaster test. There's some additional savings, right?
So,
Do you ever recommend open or closed sale on that?
Actually, do you mind if we hold off on that question and we'll take that? The question was about open or closed cell foam, and let me go a little deeper when we get to this. We'll get to a section where we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, let me give you the Southface party line, and I believe this, that all insulation is good if it's installed right. Okay, and I have seen good installations of every kind of insulation, as have I seen bad. So it's very much the quality of installation, but there are pros and cons to open and close, and we will cover that. What I'd like to do is just very quickly knock out airflow, and we will try to get y'all to a break. Air movement is really simple. Air movement in a building, to have air movement, you need two things. You need to have a pressure difference, and you need to have a hole. We can't get rid of pressure differences, but what can we seal up? The holes. Does that make sense? So the code is pushing us to do that. There's also a rule, see if this makes sense. If you put 100 CFM into a building, if you blow it up with 100 CFM, what has to happen somewhere else in the building? 100 has to go out, right? Just like if you run a clothes dryer and you exhaust 200 CFM from a building, what has to happen somewhere else? 200 has to be made up by leaking in somewhere else. So it's that balance of sort of CFM that you should always hang on to. The things that cause pressure differences fall into sort of two categories. Natural things that cause pressure differences and mechanical fans. Roxanne, tell us about the natural things.
So there are two natural things. The first of which that we're probably familiar with is wind. We've probably all experienced that. For a demonstration of how it actually affects your house.
I'm here.
All right, you're going to do it. Great.
I'm ready. Oh.
All right.
Put the house up here so everyone can see this because you're not going to want to miss this. You're going to write home about this.
Woo!
Thank you very much.
All right, but we see that he exerted a positive. Well, let's pretend
a blowhard. Yeah, there you go.
He blew from this side, so he put a positive pressure over on this side, which meant that it had a negative pressure inside the house. But on this side, it kind of experienced a positive pressure, which meant it was a negative pressure out here. Does everybody kind of see that? That's what that kind of diagram is showing. Also, stack effect. I think we're familiar with this. We use them to vent some of our appliances, or not appliances, but equipment. What's an example of something that we rely on stack effect to take away combustion air?
The water heater? Is that what you're, I'm sorry.
A water heater,
Oh.
a fireplace, a furnace. These are all things in which we rely on the stack effect to actually remove that combustion air. And what's really interesting is that it actually happens in a house naturally. And so what happens is at the very bottom of the house where all there are leaks or anything on a cold day, it actually will cause, when Mike said that hot air rises, that hot air actually kind of comes up here and creates a positive pressure at the top of the house. It's really, really positive at the top and starts escaping, which means what? It's coming in somewhere, right? If it's escaping out the top, it means it's coming in somewhere, and it's always coming in at the bottom. And it's always the most negative at the very, very bottom. So if you have large holes down there, it's coming in, it's gusting, basically. And so there you go. Mike's drawing it for us here. So at the very top of the house, we have the most positive pressure. At the bottom of the house, we have the most negative pressure with that stack effect. And then there's this pressure plane, this neutral pressure plane that happens where there are actually no pressure difference. Although it's really positive up top and really negative below, there's absolutely no pressure difference right in the middle, which means that even if we have a hole right there, that phenomenon, let's call it, there's no leakage.
This is really trippy.
It is. And so we have an actual picture of it, which is great, right? Not always do you get to see building science in a picture. This is actually a renovation on a multifamily building, and right now we have some, let's just call it poly on the outside that's, sealed.
It's like
around.
house wrap, basically.
House wrap.
Yeah.
But we can see at the bottom, what is that house wrap doing? Is it going out or being sucked in? It's being sucked in. It has that negative pressure, and it's really being sucked in at the very bottom. You can see that. And then when we move up, we kind of see this place where it's neither out nor in. And then we keep going up and keep going, we get that really big pressure, that really big billowing out. And so what happens if we were to have a hole where the red arrows are? What's happening there? If we had a hole right there.
Which way would air go?
Into the building. All right, if we had a hole in the green arrows, where is it going? Going out. If we had a hole in the red or the black dotted line. Isn't that amazing? If you had a hole right there at that dotted line, no air's moving. You could have the biggest hole you could drive a car through, and there'd be because there's no pressure difference, there's no air movement.
I usually like to smell a magic marker and think about this. But anyway, do you get the idea that the stack effect is always causing pressure differences inside and outside of a house? But it's not that strong of a force. It's pretty weak. It's a function of how tall your house is and what the temperature difference is. So you get more stack effect in the winter than in the summer. The last thing that we want to talk about is mechanical fans. So fans obviously can cause big pressure differences. But you start off with a fairly small fan. Someone's stuck in the ceiling up there. A small fan is a bath fan. How many CFM is a bath fan going to move? About? Yeah, in the neighborhood of maybe 50 CFM, something like that.
You guys might want to be filling this in just so you know.
Oh, is this on the test?
Well, it's not on a test,
okay.
But it's just good to know.
Just kidding about the test, by the way. All right, how about a kitchen range hood? A hood over a cooktop. One that's exhausted to the outside, not the stupid one that recirculates into your forehead. That's dumb. What about a range hood? Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, the normal size ones are maybe 100, 150, a couple hundred. There's sort of an intermediate size one that y'all have seen a Gen Air type cooktop, a downdraft range hood. Do you think that has to be more or less CFM for a downdraft? It's, you got it. It's that stack effect you're trying to overcome. Bingo. You got it right on, John. So a downdraft might be as many as like 500 CFM. And then, John, we have a special classification for the big ones that you mentioned. We call it the I want to be emerald, I want to be a chef kind of hood. And that's the ones that can push 1,100, 1,500 CFM. I kid you not. I was in a person's house doing an energy assessment on their house, and they were proudly showing me this big stainless steel Viking range hood. You know what I'm talking about? And it's basically a commercial range hood stuck in a residential kitchen. And it was 2,000 CFM. And this is absolutely true. I'm like, the guy was like, yep, it's 2,000 CFM. And I said, wow. I said, that's pretty big. I said, where's your makeup air? And he said, huh? And I said, well, when you turned it on, what happened to your cat? I mean, it's 2,000 CFM is a blower door, y'all. That's a big fan. That's a big honking fan. So
that's a diagnostic blower door.
It's a tool, right? Exactly. So what's ironic to me is if that fan were installed in a commercial building, guess what it would have to have? Makeup air, right? So it would have to have makeup air. But in a home here, we can violate physics. So you have to be careful. And then a clothes dryer. How many was it? CFM is a clothes dryer? You remember? 200. 200. A clothes dryer is about 200. So all of these fans are exhaust fans. So that when they operate, what kind of pressure do they put the house under? Negative, right? The one fan that is neither negative nor positive is the blower fan. And Ed, approximately how many CFM per ton of air conditioning? Maybe 400? That's a typical number you see kicked around. So it's not much. Even a fairly small air conditioner is like a 2.5 ton air conditioner. That's 2.5 tons, that's 1,000 CFM. 1,000 CFM being pulled out, but 1,000 CFM being put back in. So Roxanne, turn it on over here, and she turns on the air handler. It's on, but you notice the flaps on the doors are still pretty much hanging down. So what would you say the pressure on this house is? Positive, negative, or neutral? Right? Same amount of air out equals same amount of air in. The pressure's not out of whack. So why is this even listed up here? Why do we care? Well, duct leakage is a huge one. So there's actually two things. One is duct leakage. The other is return path. So maybe let's do return path first. So I want you to envision a home. See if you've ever seen such a home that has one return duct. Anybody ever been in a house with one return duct? Is that a rare occurrence I'm describing is my question? No. Very common to find one return. Where is it located? Right in the central hallway, right? And that works great. Sure, why not? Where are all the supply ducts located? All the bedrooms, right? So everything works great. So, okay, Roxanne, everything's working fine until nighttime. We close the bedroom door. What happened to the pressure in the bedroom where the supply duct is? What's the pressure like? The blue side. Is it positive? So what does that mean? If there's a hole, which way is air going? You're throwing conditioned air out. Air will find the path of least resistance, it will leave. Okay? And if, let's just say, 150 CFM is leaking out the bedroom side of the house, what has to happen somewhere else? 150 CFM has to come in. Where's it coming in from? The main part of the house. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is a definite case where that fan can really drive infiltration. So how do we fix this problem? I got a solution for you.
Let's undercut the door.
Okay, so Ed's got probably the best idea, which is put a return in every room that has a supply. What's another option? We could do a jumper duct or something like that, a transfer duct, something that allows the pressure to bleed from the bedroom back to the hallway. Right? Okay, what do we try to do sometimes, but it doesn't really work well? Yeah, undercut the door.
All right, okay, let's see, undercut the door.
By the way,
right,
you do the calculations. We do the calculations, Roxanne. About a 10 or 15-inch undercut. That's all we're asking for. Try to sell your homeowner on this, okay? So doesn't take much, but about a 10 or a 15-inch undercut. Okay, so we've got to think about how the air gets back. I'm sorry, why don't you do duct leakage and tell us really quickly about duct leakage?
Let's go to the next slide. All right, so in this example, we're going to simulate some supply leakage. So let's just think about this real quick. If we have a 2.5 ton system, and that's what our air handler is, we are going to be calling 1,000 CFM from the house, right? So if we're calling 1,000 CFM from the house, 200's leaving to the crawl space, how much is actually getting back into the house? 800. I heard it. All right, so if we're pulling out 1,000 and only giving the house 800, is this house starving or bloating? Starving. All right, so let's see. So you get a little bit of this.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there it is. You see how the center of the house is going under a negative pressure because I just gave you some supply leakage.
So the
We
house
can also see the crawl space is now at positive pressure, right? It's getting 200 CFM. So what we kind of like to say is supply leaks suck. It's kind of counterintuitive to our brain, right? Because we think a supply is always pressurizing a room, right? But that's not actually when you're leaking, that's not what happens. It's actually causing the house to go under a negative pressure.
Okay.
All right, second example.
So supply leaks will cause the house pressure to go negative. A return leak will cause the house pressure to go, what do you think? Positive. Let's see if that's true, Roxanne. And if you do the math, it's the same kind of animal where you're putting all 1,000 into the house. You're only taking, let's say, 700 out of the house. The 700 that's coming out of the house means 300 is leaking in from wherever that return leak is. Where are the return leaks located? Oh, you know, just the attic or the crawl space. And they're sucking in disgusting crawl space air full of mold or hot, dusty attic air full of, you know, humidity. And you don't want that. So what happens if you have supply and return leaks? Which one is greater? What happens if you have 300 of return and 200 of supply? When you turn on the air handler, what's the pressure of the house going to be? This is a thinking question. In other words, you have more return leaks than you have supply leaks. What will happen to the pressure? Positive. Does that make sense? So believe it or not, we can actually do a test. We can go into anybody's house and take a little pressure gauge and run a tube outside and do nothing more than walk over to the thermostat and turn the air handler on and watch the pressure gauge. If the pressure gauge goes negative, it means you have a lot of supply leaks. If the pressure gauge goes positive, it means you have a lot of return leaks. If the pressure gauge doesn't change and the air handler kicked on, what does that tell you? It tells you one of two possible things. What's one thing it might tell you? That it's tight, right? That it's nice and tight. What's the other thing it might tell you? That you have the same amount of positive, you have the same amount of supply and
that's
return
what I'm
leakage,
kind of
right?
trying to show you on this one right here. We got the same amount of duct leakage on the supply side and the return side.
That's not how you fix the problem, is make the equal size hole, by the way, in just in case you're wondering. So, all right, so the bottom line here is that these fans that we put in houses can cause big pressure differences, and you know, this with holes in the envelope will drive infiltration. I think with that, we should let y'all let's take a short break.
Talk about heat, talk about air. Just briefly, you mentioned moisture. Moisture is fascinating. I wish we had more time to spend on this because this is really, really important. We do spend more time on some of the earthcraft right now. And if you're really into this and you think this stuff is kind of fun, I think it's interesting. There are some free online learning modules that you can do via our website that covers it. There's one about basics of building science that goes into this in more detail. But from the standpoint of the high level, water flows in two forms, either in the liquid form or in the vapor form. And then in the liquid form and the vapor form, it has two possible ways it can travel. Liquid form that we most worry about, we refer to it as bulk moisture. That's a fancy way of saying drainage. And a plumbing leak. If you have a problem with drainage, nothing else we say will fix that problem. Fix the drainage problem. It's the key thing. It's the number one killer of buildings. But we also have issues with liquid water, given the fact that most things that we build with are made out of a material that's porous, and porous materials, if you stick a paper towel in a cup of water, what's going to happen? It's going to wick that stuff up. And guess what? A 2x4 will do the same thing. And what do you think about what?
Insulation does it too.
Insulation does it too. Paper face gypsum does it. Do you think masonry could wick moisture?
Oh yeah.
You know, mortar and brick and all this stuff. So all these things we build with can wick moisture around. So we have to just be really smart about that. And products like this, seal gasket, when you have a slab and you transition from concrete to wood, we really like a product like this. In addition to running a bead of caulk on the edge, we probably want to put this as well. They make a 2x4. This is a 2x6 version of it because it provides air sealing and a capillary break, so it won't wick moisture up. So there's some little details like that if you do them during construction, it's easy, but obviously hard to fix after the fact. All right, but the one we want to touch on is water vapor. And Roxanne, kind of explain what's going on between the two ways vapor can move.
All right, vapor can actually move through an actual hole or crack inside, let's call it your wall or floor or ceiling. That is called air leakage. That's where that humidity, the air outside, because we live in a hot, humid climate, is actually getting into our house through infiltration. The second option is called vapor diffusion, and it's how vapor just kind of like passes through a wall. Does that kind of make sense? There's no hole, it just kind of diffuses through the material out into the other side. I can't say historically, but in the past we might have thought vapor diffusion might have been the big driving force for moisture inside the building. And that just really isn't true. That's what we're learning up here with this graph. Vapor diffusion only accounts for 1/3 of a quart of moisture coming into a home and about, during the cooling season or the summer season. Air leakage, however, can be responsible up to 30 quarts of water. So that's a significant 90 times more water through air leakage, through those actual infiltration, through humidity, than an actual vapor diffusion through a wall. So let's recap. Is it more important to put a vapor barrier in a house or air seal? Hope I'm hearing
Is it just a little bit more important or a lot
air
more important?
sealing. And is it just a little bit more important to air seal, or is it
100 times,
really significant?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 30 quarts of water, guys, versus 1/3 of 1 quart.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of like giving you some, perspective. Is, vapor barriers are good, but that's not the main cause. The main cause of water getting into your home is through all the leaks and through carrying through humidity in the air through those leaks. That can cause a main problem. Air sealing is the big deal.
The other thing, too, is that we don't live in a one-way climate, right? Water vapor diffuses by a side of the wall has more and another side of the wall has less. And, in Canada, it's a one-way climate, right? It's always cold outside. It's always dry outside because dry air is cold. Cold air is dry air. And inside, it's relatively humid. So that water vapor tries to transport or diffuse through the wall. So they would put a vapor retarder on the inside of their wall, on the warm side of their wall. Well, that would be correct for us in the winter, but if we were to put a vapor retarder on the inside of the wall, it would be the wrong side of the wall in the summer. Because where's the moisture in the summer? It's outside. And where is it cooler and drier? Inside, because we air condition. So a vapor retarder really can get you into trouble in our climate because it actually can trap moisture when you don't want to. And the reality of it is we are not in a one-way climate. We're in a two-directional climate where water vapor is going one way and then coming this way.
Oh, but Mike, I have the perfect solution.
Oh, yeah, this is a good solution. Okay.
I'm going to put the vapor barrier on the inside and on the outside.
Now, is that a good idea? Should I put a vapor barrier on both sides? If you do that, what do you create?
A trap.
A terrarium, or whatever that thing is called.
A terrarium in your wall, which means you're going to have moisture. You have that vapor get in there, which condensates on the actual, vapor barrier, and then starts to pool inside of your wall cavity, and that just is not a good thing, guys.
Yeah. So we don't want to, and we learned a lot of lessons about this because we would put. Anybody remember the old synthetic stucco on houses? We put synthetic stucco, which is a cladding that actually can work really well, but we put it up without a drainage plane behind it. That was the big mistake. That we should have treated synthetic stucco just like a brick veneer wall. How come a brick veneer wall absorbs all kind of moisture, right? Brick cladding absorbs lots of moisture. How come the wood wall doesn't rot down? What's between the brick cladding and the wood wall? airspace and a water shedding surface, right? So if we had done the exact same thing with EFS, in synthetic stucco, that would have worked fine. But when we didn't, that was the problem. In fact, it was really a problem in houses where they put synthetic stucco on the outside and they put plastic polyethylene on the inside, because then we did really create 2 vapor retarders in that trap moisture. So the bottom line is, and you're going to see this in the energy code, there is no requirement for any kind of a vapor retarder on your insulation.
In walls.
You can in walls or ceilings.
Right.
John, you can install unfaced fiberglass bats and to your heart's content. You can install paper face bats as well. Personally, I like the unfaced kind. I actually think they friction fit a little better, and people obsess with compressing the bat to staple it in. I actually think you're better off not doing that. That's my personal opinion, but you do not have to have a vapor retarder. You do have to have an air barrier, because the air barrier is what keeps the moisture from flowing. Does that work for you? Okay. So don't do that. This is this person that put plastic on their inside of their wall, and they had a moisture issue. The wall was unable to dry to the inside. In the summertime, the wall is drying to the inside. In the wintertime, the wall is drying to the outside. They stopped it from drying to the inside. It didn't take long for it to get really wet to start growing stuff, and then attracting termites as well. Okay? So stay away from plastic. The one place that we do want plastic in a house is not in the walls, not in the ceiling. Where do we want plastic? Yeah, underneath the slab or on the floor of a crawl space, right? Does that make sense? Because we're keeping that moisture in the ground from being able to diffuse up, and that is a good place. In fact, the code requires that we do this really well. We need 100% plastic coverage, and we want the seams overlapped and sealed. We want it to run up the sides of the wall and sealed. This is in a crawl space, and do it right. So that vapor barrier in that case is good, and we really like what Roxanne has, which is what? Thicker plastic. I mean,
is it 20 mil?
Yeah, I've even seen 6 mil though that has the reinforcement in it. That's a lot stronger than regular 6 mil.
Yeah, this is. You're not going to be like tearing this. You probably can take that and tear that apart. But
obviously more expensive, but a pretty good durable product. Okay. So the last thing we want to touch on, we mentioned this earlier, was we said, look, if you build a tight house, that's great, save energy, but what are some ways to ventilate? You can basically cause air changes in a house in 3 ways. You can suck air out of the house, you can pump air into the house, or you can do both at the same time. And it will affect the pressure being negative or balanced or positive. So the one that we generally don't want to do is the negative pressure whole house ventilation effect.
I can turn on a bathroom.
I don't know why that is doing that, but if you lived in a humid climate like Georgia, why would you not want your house to be under negative pressure all the time?
Oh, he said it.
What's the answer? Yeah, if your house is always negative, then you're essentially pulling moisture in, from wherever all the time. That's the danger part. So if you lived in a humid climate, would you rather have your house be slightly negative or slightly positive? Mm-hmm. How can you remember this? Let me see can we come up with something that you can remember. How about this? Don't let your building suck. Okay, write that down. Don't let your building suck. Okay, put your buildings under slight positive pressure, or at least keep them balanced. So as a result, we like spot fans, meaning bathroom fans and kitchen fans. Get the moisture and the odors out right there at the source.
They serve a purpose.
But we don't run those continuously. So the fans that are going to run a lot longer time, we want them to either have balanced pressure or positive pressure. So Roxanne, tell us about the balanced pressure.
So for balanced pressure, what we see commonly here are called ERVs, or energy recovery ventilators. How many of you have actually seen an ERV before?
Got one in this building. Fantastic.
Even better. So ERVs are really good because it brings in the exact amount of supply air and exhausts out the exact amount of,
stale
air. But when they're exhausting and supplying in, they actually cross over. And what they do is they have kind of a heat transfer passage. And so what happens is when the air being exhausted leaves, it actually pre-cools or preheats the air coming in. And that's really cool. You've just kind of picked up some energy savings because you're bringing in 95-degree heat heated air from the outside in the summertime, you kind of want that to be closer to your, your conditioned space temperature. And so that's a really great thing. And these can either be centrally located, attached to your HVAC equipment, or it can be disjoint.
This is, and usually ERVs have always traditionally been very expensive, but there's a company that makes a very small one that's only $300.
Yeah.
And it's Panasonic, and it's a very efficient, very, very low wattage. I think it only does about 40 CFM, but for a small house, that would easily satisfy the ventilation code. So that's an option. And now it doesn't, typically when you said ERV, you're thinking like $2,500. I don't know, Ed, did you ever install ERVs? They're pretty expensive. And but this is a small one that you could use. So another approach that we use on a lot of earthcraft houses is we simply duct in an outside air duct and we attach it to the return, so that when this system operates, most of the air comes from the house, but a little bit of air comes from the outside, and the house experiences a slight positive pressure. Roxanne, can you kind of help me with the math as I'll draw this in? Let's say I'm putting 1,000 in up here.
So you got a 2.5 ton system.
Zeros
You bring
are
it in
hard.
50.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm asking. All
Yeah,
right, so
we'll bring it in 50.
let's just assume that we're going to be bringing in 50 through here. We're still calling 1,000, and so what happens is that we only bring 950 from the house, which means that it's coming in at a positive pressure. Does that kind of make sense? This house is bloating. We're giving it 1,000, and we're only taking 950 from the house. And so what it does is there's a thermostat that you can, or I can't say a thermostat, a ventilation controller that says, I want to bring in 50 CFM for 15 minutes every hour. Now, if you are in a heating or cooling season and you already have your equipment working and it's running and it runs for 20 minutes, it just opens up the damper. And what it does is it has a mechanical damper. You can see the little switch on it on top, and it just opens it up and it allows air to pass through. After those 15 minutes, it shuts and it's just operating normal. But if you're in a
and what's great about that is it doesn't over-ventilate on the extreme hot or extreme cold days.
Right. And on the swing season, it actually has a control that will actually override your air handler. So, because you're in the swing season, you don't always operate your equipment, right? Because it's nice outside. You don't have to. Why waste the energy? So in the swing season, you might not turn on your cooling system or your heating system. But the great thing about this is it will turn on the air handler just to turn on the fan, to move the air from outside through this vent into the house.
So
this system
yeah.
is basically just a 6-inch duct, right? This little mechanical damper and a controller. So all said and done, installed somewhere between $250 and $300. So it's a really cheap option.
But it's a great way, if anybody ever says, I'm worried you're making my house, really tight, and you can say, well, I've got intentional ventilation. And like I said, a lot of the Beyond Code pretty much all of the Beyond Code programs require some form of ventilation. This one, I think, makes a lot of sense for our climate. So this is something, by the way, that a lot of commercial buildings do this same strategy, unless they have an ERV, which is even better. So this is a fairly inexpensive way of having intentional ventilation. So, any questions on this? All right, we're going to wrap up and just say, to kind of finish up our building science little foray here, the comfort around you, the comfort is not just the air around you, it's also the amount of moisture in the air, and it's also the air that's blowing across you. The speed or the velocity of the air across your skin affects your comfort. Think about a ceiling fan, right? Ceiling fans in your house don't actually change the temperature of the air, right? In fact, if anything, the heat of the motor slightly warms the air in the house, but they make you feel more comfortable, so they provide a cooling effect because of that sort of, your skin evaporates better. And then the last thing is surfaces that surround you affect your comfort. Remember we said your body is either radiating heat away or absorbing heat into it based on the surfaces surrounding you. If the surfaces around you are cold, even though the air is 70 degrees, you feel cold. If the surfaces around you are warm, even though the air is 60 degrees, you feel warm. So those are kind of some kind of things to give some considerations to. Any thoughts on those? All right, let's wrap up with a picture of the test that we're going to do.
All right, and so how many of you have actually seen blower door or duct blaster equipment? All right, so for some of you this isn't new, but in case you haven't seen it, a blower door is what you're going to be seeing on your left-hand side. It's how we use to depressurize a house to get a reading to see how leaky it is. On the right-hand side is the duct blaster, a much smaller fan that we use to pressurize ducts to see how leaky they are. We're actually going to show you a duct blaster example today. We're not going to do a blower door. Those are hard to do on the road, shall we say.
We could almost do this room.
Almost do
but we'll do it. We'll give you an example and let you come up and play with it if you want at the end.